Lovely to meet you, Jen. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Isaiah, for setting this up as well.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So nice to see you.
Likewise.
Take another sip of coffee bright and early in the morning.
Lovely coffee. and I'm on to Pinot.
Hey, there you go.
If you can't tell from the accent, he's calling out of Australia. So it's kind of night. He's kind of mellowing down. It'd be kind of a functional alcoholic if he's drinking alcohol in the morning, right?
Yeah,
All right.
medium. I mean, I don't know how high functioning you're going to be if you're drinking that early in the morning.
So thank you for joining us today at RHE Podcast. I'm joined with Harry Key. Is that your actual last name?
Yes.
That's a really cool last name. And Jen Furlong. And where are you calling out of?
I am located in Richmond Hill, Georgia. So it's a small town right outside of the city of Savannah, Georgia.
Any relation to Edward?
No.
Okay.
Not that I know of.
Okay, maybe you could be. All right. So before we get started, some of the stuff might be a little bit controversial. So we want to get started with something a little bit more lighthearted. I don't want to get lightheaded.
That may result in lightheadedness.
Yeah. So we just want to start off with a friendly fire round where I'm asking you guys both some questions and just answer them as soon as possible. Okay.
Oh God.
All right. Shoot off the hip. You ready?
It's called friendly fire. Like we're just going to take shots at one another.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Here we go. First question is, if you had to be stuck in any decade for the remaining years of your life, what decade would it be?
The 90s.
90s. There you go. She didn't. No hesitation.
This one or a later one. I think life's really good and getting better at a rapid pace. It would be this one or one like 10, 20, 30 years, 30 years from now.
In the future.
See some cool tech. As you can see, I like my tech.
Positivity. I love that sense of hope.
All right. All right.
Yeah, I'm so confused that everybody's like, well, the way the world is nowadays, I'm like, isn't it pretty good? But anyway.
All right, here we go. Here's another one. Who is your favorite 80s action movie star?
Arnie.
80s action movie star. Arnold.
Arnold. The governor of our lovely state, California. He was the former governor. And okay, here we go. Well, this might be a no-brainer for you, but tea or coffee?
Coffee.
I'm gonna go for tea for Harry, right? Because he's Aussie.
Coffee. Easily coffee.
All right. And what is an ideal date night for you?
An ideal date night for me is taking the boat out for a booze cruise.
Wow.
And packing a little picnic and just kind of sitting on the water, floating and having a nice glass of wine with my husband and just chilling.
All right.
Yeah.
And Harry?
For me, it's easily going for a motorbike ride.
Oh, nice.
Like a sort of multi-day trip, bit of camping or something like that.
Wow. That sounds amazing. All right. So before we start off, we would like to ask you a couple of questions, some general questions. First and foremost, can you tell us what you do and about your website and anything like that you want to tell us about your job and past?
I'm in what I like to refer to as phase 3 of my professional life. At going back to graduating from high school, I joined the Marine Corps right out of high school. And when I was a Marine, I was in public affairs. So I was a journalist, and then I was an editor. I did community relations for a while, and that introduced me to the wider field of communication. And so when I got out of the Marine Corps, I was already at least one step ahead, knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, I fell in love with the field of communication. So I went and got a bachelor's and a master's degree in communication. And then that started sort of phase 2 of my career path, because I had a professor while I was in graduate school frantically looking for someone to cover a class, to teach a public speaking class. And he asked me if I would do it. And, I was a broke graduate student. So
Mhm.
of course, my first question is, you going to pay me? And it's
Hmm.
like, of course. I'm like, okay. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I had never taught a class before, never put a syllabus together, but I was like, I'm going to dive right in and do this. And I fell in love with the classroom. So out of the 30 years experience that I have in the communication field as a communication practitioner, for 17 of those years, I taught at the college level. So I taught classes,
Wow.
public speaking, I taught basic human communication skills, business communication, and intercultural communication. And I recently decided that it's time for phase 3. So I started my own communication consulting firm, and that's hence the website. I got my business license, and
Wow.
I decided to just jump in again, make this transition and kind of dive in and do this thing. And so, yeah, that's where I am now.
And Harry, would you mind giving me a little background as well?
Sure. So I came to end up doing a similar thing to Jen from a very different path. No military. I'm not tough. I cry and apologize when other people when other people hit me. So I definitely wouldn't have been cut out for being a Marine. My background is that I sort of did the standard, went to school, went to university thing, and then after university decided to travel to India, and was traveling around India on a motorbike and loving it, and then ran out of money in Mumbai. And somebody said, do you want to be in a Bollywood film? And a little bit like you, Jen, I was like,
what?
are you going to pay me? And they were like, yep, sure, we'll pay you 1,000 rupees, which I won't let you do the math, so you can
Like
pretend
60
that that's a
bucks?
large amount of money. 60 bucks. It's like 20 bucks. But yeah, I was an extra in a film and thought, oh, this is really fun. And got kind of addicted to it. So I ended up becoming a Bollywood actor. So I did that then for
What?
5 years, where I was playing a white guy. As you can tell, I have the required single attribute. And so, yeah, played a villain in Bollywood films then for the next about 5 years. And started to become interested in how do people speak during that, because most of the other Bollywood actors are just sort of runaways, they're not, I'd trained as an actor, but they were just sort of on the run from the law or a failed marriage or something. And I would work with them on how they would deliver their lines. And I found that I was quite good at that, and it was really fulfilling, and the changes would stick. Somebody would develop a bit more confidence or a bit better way of projecting or enunciating. And then later you'd be hanging out with them going, I can see you're different now. You're not huge. It's not like you're changing somebody's life in a session, but they would be a bit different. And I just got addicted to that. And then I went and saw myself. I was a lead role in a pretty big film, and I was really bad. It's just catastrophically bad as an actor. And I just hadn't noticed it yet. I don't know what had happened, but yeah, when I eventually saw myself on screen, I was like, I've got to do something different. So went to the UK and set up myself as a company where I now work with individuals within organizations. Very similar things. So it'll be public speaking skills, persuasion, coaching. I've written a book on the topic called Speak for Yourself. And
really?
Yeah. So that's
clever
how
title.
I got to where I'm at. Well,
All
now
right.
in Australia, but yeah.
That is so cool. And I wrote a note. Now I'm going to have to look up your film repertoire.
Maybe we'll play a clip on here.
So, yeah, absolutely. Please. Yes.
Speaking of clip, we're going to play a quick little clip of you. So Harry, if you want to key that up.
Yeah.
All right.
Certainly.
All right.
Get that jam
For
boy
your
out of the
watching
way.
pleasure, I want to know what's going through your mind at this moment.
Don't throw up.
Don't
throw up.
I was going to say, don't start crying. This is sorry.
It was actually a bit of a rough start because the day before during dress rehearsals, they bussed in a bunch of high school kids so that we could practice our talk, in front of these high school kids. And it was great for us to be able to get up there and kind of work out, what we needed to work out. And then it was great for the kids because they got to see kind of like the behind the scenes things that happened. you know, and the kids were amazing. I will tell you, at the very beginning, you know, I started off with a question, you know, about the golden rule. You know, who hasn't heard about the golden rule, right? And they were interacting and they were just so lively. And fast forward to the next day when all of the adults come, right, to watch the TED Talk, you start off with a question and it was like pure silence. Like,
Wow.
nobody wanted to say. And so I was like, I think y'all are just as nervous as I am, you know, and I was the first presenter, which was another thing.
Oh, that's,
in
oh
itself.
God, that's horrible.
a tough one too.
And I wasn't prepared to be the first presenter. The day before, I was told I was going to wrap everything up. So I was supposed to be the last presenter of the day. The morning of the presentations, we all get there super early and somebody tells me, hey, did you check it out? They made some changes on the schedule. I was like, no, let me go look. And it's like, oh yeah, we decided to take you from last to first, Jen. So get into makeup, get ready.
Well,
you should take credit from that though, because usually I think anybody who's organizing an event and trying to figure out who to go first, they're quite often one of the things they're thinking, aside from availability and, you know, if that person's not off the flight yet, who do we put there? But quite often I think the decision they make is, who do I think is going to warm up the crowd for the next, for the other
There you go. You know what I was going to say is, one, okay, that would be the most nerve-wracking, definitely. But at least you would get to say that I don't have to follow someone. Like, just imagine if you follow like a Dale Carnegie or something, you know, and then like, what do you go? You're like, you're gonna bomb no matter what, you know.
Right? Yeah.
But
Thanks, Tony Robbins, for warming them up for me.
God, right.
But this, to me, I think is a crucial thing, though, to think about with public speaking. And a lot of people have exactly that thought, Isaiah, which is like, oh, I'm going to look terrible if I go after that person. And I would think two things about that is, like, one is, don't set for yourself that expectation, even if it is true. And second is, it's rarely true. People typically want to see you win. Like, unless you're getting up there and being like, why it's okay to punch your employees on Mondays or give some really terrible talk they're going to want to disagree with. Most of the time people want you to nail it. Like they want to be inspired. They're really happy to see somebody succeed. And if you have in your head, oh, I'm not as good as the last person, I think you waste some of your brain's processing power bringing yourself down while you're trying to get out a message, rather than going, oh, awesome, this person's lined up the crowd for me. What interesting anecdotes can I tell that will link to what they're saying? How can I make this work better, rather than how can I use this as an excuse to get nervous?
Yeah, you know what? I do want to say something about that, and this will lead into the next question. But I remember maybe around 20 years ago, I think I was in high school, and I remember watching like some kind of town hall or whatever of Bill Clinton. And that guy just walked in and he had a smile on his face. And it was like, you could feel from the screen, you could see the presence of the place. It's just like, wow, people were just in awe of him. And my sister, she's actually quite a big politician in California. She made history for being the first Latina in the position that she was in, being a president of all the supervisors in California. But I went to go see her speak once, and similar thing, because there's just all these different speakers, no one's really paying attention, and she came up to speak and everyone just went, you could just see the body language of everyone change. So this is leading to this next question, because obviously you can manipulate people. Okay, so I have a question about whether or not persuasion is ethical, but really what more in lines I'm speaking about is actual manipulation. So can you answer that question? Is persuasion ethical or persuasion / manipulation like ethical? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a complete difference between persuasion and manipulation. You know, of course, if you get into the area of you have some type of a hidden agenda, right? And you know that quote that you're using against that person, you know, you're trying to convince your audience of something, you know, you took that quote out of context, or, you know, that the statistics, you're being, you know, unfair with the statistics. So I think it all boils down to the place you're coming from and what is ultimately your goal. you absolutely can have a debate. You absolutely can persuade others. You know, if you're having an argument, whether it's on a question of fact, like you're trying to argue that something is true or false, you know, or if you're trying to convince someone to agree with you on your position of, you know, some topic in politics, or whether you want to try to create a call to action, you know, you absolutely can do it in an ethical way. It's just what is that underlying goal? Do you truly want to win this argument because you really do think that you're correct, and you understand that you have the examples and the facts and, you know, everything to back your claim up? Or do you know that your argument is crap, so you're going to try to pull in all these illogical, you know, arguments to try to just manipulate everyone to agree with you, despite the fact you know that you could potentially be wrong?
So let me clarify something. Two things that you're saying. One is that if you're doing so be honest about, let's see, so would you say that it's just being honest about intentions, and then
yeah, absolutely. Honesty, not having a hidden agenda. And then anything you pull together, you know, you're pulling it together, being mindful that, you know, you have an ethical responsibility to your audience, you know, whether it's an audience of 1 or, you know, 1,000, you really do have an ethical responsibility to that audience.
Speaking of which, I want to ask one more question, then pass it over to Harry, because are you familiar with Jim Jones? Yes. The guy who went down into French Guiana and killed 1,000 people. 1,000 people committed suicide. Biggest mass suicide in recent history. Okay. Anyway, if you watch his speaking videos, you'll just be like, man, I would follow that guy into the middle of the jungle, like, because seriously, just so persuasive, has so much charisma. So I guess the other part of that is using the persuasion to do some good, right? Because that's actually separate from being honest, because you could be honest about trying to do bad things, such as some politicians. They have some very nefarious way of manipulating people. But so I think those are really good points right there. I want to pass it over to Harry.
Yeah, I think it's one of the challenges I think there is we all think we're doing good. Like, he killed himself too. Jim Jones was part of the suicide pact, but he killed himself. And I think what can happen is we can be persuasive, particularly cult leaders like that. They call it this sort of, you get this Messiah complex, and there is I forget, they call it the Messiah pathway or something like this, which is you get so used to people believing everything you say that the sort of ultimate final step is to kill yourself. And so I think that I think persuasion is ethical. Absolutely. Obviously not manipulation, which is you're saying, Jen, if you're being dishonest about your motives, or you're selectively quoting things or deliberately dodging the point or something, but we know that. I don't mean, sorry, your point is not valid when I say we know that. I mean, we know that within ourselves. When we're doing it, we go like, I'm being a bit dishonest here. And then the other fascination I have is exactly the same persuasion strategies we could use to bring somebody else over, or indeed also manipulate somebody else. We use those on ourselves. So if you develop a skill with persuasion, you develop two things, and ideally both in equal proportion. And that is, one is an ability to convince somebody else, but another is to be vigilant and critical about the kind of thoughts you choose to believe, you choose to take on. Because you can go, well, I know that if I talk to you about people of authority or people with stellar reputations who also agree with me on this point, then I know that's going to be persuasive to you. But at the same time, what that says to me is I could be fooled. If you just said, hey, Harry, I know you quite admire Elon Musk and the stuff he does because he's a futurist and you're into that stuff. Therefore, I'm going to link it to that. So what it hints at is both how to persuade somebody else, but also how to not fall down a rabbit hole and go, oh, hang on, I'm deceiving myself now. And that's where I think the Jim Jones stuff comes in, which is we will fall for our own traps and we won't be aware that we're essentially bullshitting ourselves.
Oh, let's watch. Watch profanity, please.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. So I got another question. For you.
Let me see what we've got on the list here, don't we?
Yeah.
Explain the platinum rule.
Explain the platinum
The
rule.
platinum rule. Well, you know, we all, I think at least the vast majority of us growing up, we probably at least one point in our lives heard the golden rule, right? I mean, everything from our parents to our teachers to, you know, the adults around us now. Treat others the way you want to be treated, right?
Mhm.
And it's a really great rule to follow, especially, you know, when you're trying to teach little kids the importance of empathy, right? The
Right.
importance of respect and boundaries, and it's a very simple way to be able to try to get, you know, that across. But when you transition to your more important relationships, you know, long-term important relationships. I'm sorry, can you hear my dogs?
That's fine.
It's all right. I like dogs.
Yeah. I love them until they just, you know, you want to stray.
Well,
Anyway.
I live in South Korea, so I'm not going to say the joke, but kind of fill in the rest of the joke.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but with the platinum rule, basically it's taking the same concept, but you are tweaking it just a little bit. So instead of thinking about treating others the way you want to be treated, treating others the way they want to be treated.
Mhm.
So, and this is very useful in your more important relationships because we all know everybody's not the same, you know. So if you think about whether it's a relationship with a romantic partner or if it's with a coworker, you know, your best friend, likely there are going to be some things that are different. You know, you're not all going to have the same values, the same belief systems, the same likes, the same dislikes. So, you know, that's what the platinum rule, the premise behind the platinum rule is getting to really know that other person and then being respectful enough to treat them the way they want to be
Right.
treated.
So that's good. That's really good. Okay, so I want to say a couple of things. The golden rule does definitely have some flaws in it. I believe it was Harry who talked about. Harry, was that you who talked about being in an elevator and like maybe making a pass on a woman? Was that you,
Yes.
Harry? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So if you
Yeah,
got into
which
an
is the
elevator,
sort of, yeah, go on.
and you made a pass on a woman, maybe you would like someone who'd be more aggressive in that sense. And so that would be like a classic example where you might want someone to come on to you, but that's not necessarily appropriate just to come on to someone like that, you know? So there's
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah, if I was sort of by myself and a lady walked up to me and said, "Goodness, you look fantastic in those clothes. Can I buy you a drink?" I would be like, "What a convenient and thoughtful thing to do." Absolutely. You know, whereas if I was with my friends, I'd be a little bit like, "Oh, it's kind of not the best time. I'm hanging out." Like I'm saying this with my partners in the room. I'm very happy with you. That was for the sake of discussion.
Yeah.
Whereas flip that around and say there's a woman standing totally by herself and you come up and go, "Geez, those clothes fit you well. Can I buy you a drink?" She's going to feel threatened.
Right. So
Same thing, I think, for
Well,
conversation.
I would add to that too, because, you know, Isaiah mentioned like at the beginning, though, in an elevator, you know, that's going to make a big difference as well.
Yeah,
You know,
when
if
the
you're
doors
a
close.
you're, you know, a woman in an elevator by yourself and a man comes into the elevator and all of a sudden he's like coming on strong, that's a completely different context right there. And so
Yeah.
now in my
Yeah.
mind, you know, I'm thinking,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so a couple of things. One is we got to take into consideration context, as you said. Second thing, though, I mean, we could find holes in any realm of thinking, any religion, and any kind of in atheism, communism, fascism. We can find pros and cons in anything, right? Even in capitalism, or democracy. But that being said, the platinum rule, I think you also have to understand that certain people want to be in abusive relationships. They want to be in codependency. And so some people have low self-esteem. So you also have to take that into consideration, that you can't just, you know, do something that maybe someone might want to do. And this can actually cause some ethical problems as far as like doctors and psychologists, because there are people who legitimately want to cut off their legs. You know, they want to harm themselves in that way. It's a legitimate disorder called BIAD, body identity integrity disorder. So we have to take a couple other things into consideration. But yeah, would you have any additional thoughts on that?
Well, you just reminded me of, I mean, the argument of physician-assisted suicide. I mean, you could even take it
Right.
one step further and
Right.
make the argument that, someone who is terminally ill,
Mhm.
who, has decided that they want to choose the way in which they leave the world.
Mhm.
I mean, you're right. You could pose an argument to support that, and you
Mhm.
could pose an argument that's just as much of a legitimate argument,
Mhm.
against that. So, I mean, I think that is the challenge, and it kind of goes back to your original question of um, whether or not persuasion is ethical.
Right.
The difference
Right.
between
Right. Right.
persuasion and manipulation.
Right.
Mm.
So, Harry, I want to give you the next two questions to ask her, and then I would just like to take a step back because this is more your guys' arena. So
No, I think it's fine. I
No,
think
please,
on
please.
that platinum rule, I think it's really useful and interesting because it is quite often, this has probably been your experience as well, Jen. It's quite often like deeply revelatory, more so to senior people in organizations than more sort of entry level or frontline or whatever you want to say without being awkward about it. But like I've worked for a large supermarket chain. In fact, Tesco, this is very similar, I think, or almost identical to one of their core values: treat other people the way they want to be treated. And I was doing training with them, and you would have to remind people that. You would say, what is one of the core values? And they would say, treat people the way you want to be treated. And you have to say, no, that's not it. And it was interesting because it wouldn't really change. It would change a bit the way people did their jobs on the front line, but it was huge for people more senior in the organization, because quite often those senior types are quite like alpha type personalities. They prefer facts and figures. If you're saying something that is incorrect, they've only got 3 minutes, so they don't want to have a long conversation and get to the end of this whole monologue and then find out that the whole thing was irrelevant. And they'll be like, why didn't you just interrupt me and say, no, that's wrong, the figures came through from finance yesterday? And they're like, so that's what I do to other people. And it's like, well, that might be the way you want to be treated, but it's not the way they want to be treated. So I think it's a really useful thing to think about. I really support it as an idea. I think the cases for that sort of somebody wants to be treated poorly are rare enough and extreme enough that our sort of gut can take over from there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's, it goes into, everyone has a different communication style as well. Just like you said, you use the example, you might have a chief executive officer, and they might be an action oriented type of person. So, when you go in to make your presentation, start with the results first, right? Yes. Be brief, be accurate, and get it done. Just let them know what the end result is going to be, and that you're going to be more successful if you adapt your communication style. But then you might come across someone else who, usually these are the HR directors, right? They tend to be more people oriented. So with that type of person, if you need to present, a project or a proposal or something to them, if they're people oriented, they're going to value the chit chat a little more. So don't just immediately start with your proposal like you would with, the action oriented person. You might want to set aside a minute or two for that chit chat, the small talk, and then you can gradually move over to your proposal, but then focusing on why this proposal is good for the people in the organization.
Yes.
Versus specific end results with numbers. The people-oriented person is going to be more focused on the relationships and how it's going to impact relationships of all the stakeholders involved. So and that definitely is something that goes into the platinum rule. Is you really do have to be observant enough of others. You have to kind of get rid of people are naturally egocentric creatures, right? We really are. I mean, we're constantly thinking of ourselves, all day long. What's in it for me, right? But at the end of the day, if you do want to be a more effective communicator, you have to be aware of that other person and their likes and dislikes and their communication style, and try to adapt your style to them if you want to be more effective.
Yeah. And I got it perfectly gets onto this next question. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll let you ask the next question. But Dale Carnegie, which I would consider the Bible of persuasion, How to Win Friends and Influence People, that's one of the key things that he talks about over and over, about trying to understand the other person, which is empathy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But I mean, probably he one line in there would sum up so much about like half of what you need to learn about persuasion, is that he says people are more interested in a boil on their neck than they are in a famine in Africa. And so when you understand that, how much people are driven by the ego, and it's not even entirely, because everybody hates someone who's like a selfish person or a conceited, you know, and totally interested in themselves. But the reality is that we're all like that, you know, we're all like that. And so just truly understanding, trying to see things from other people's perspective, it gets honestly beyond redundant, because he probably mentions it like 20 times in that book. So it means,
well, because he understands how thick people can be. Sometimes
repetition helps.
20 times before somebody gets
Harry?
Yeah, this is already getting, I think we've already broached this topic. So some of what we're talking about in terms of what are the most effective ways to persuade people, I've been writing this while you've been talking, Isaiah, and some of it is understand them. And I certainly think what we came up just off the back of talking about was, you were saying, Jen, is sort of, I would say, adjust your style, sort of get good at leaning into a style that you're not used to. So yeah, if you're the chit chat, let's talk about it. You know, it reminds me a bit of this. Have you seen that Discovery Insights? You know, this, I don't really teach it, but I think it's a useful model. I think it's this sort of, we've got these different personality types based on whether we are introverted, extroverted, or thinking and feeling. And so often people go, well, I'm my style, so that's who I am. And the focus, at least whenever I have anything to do with it, is no. The skill here is about leaning into somebody else's style. So if you recognize you're really direct and your results are, but you're talking to somebody who, as you were saying, wants to know how this is going to affect people and wants to sell it with a story or a bit of enthusiasm or something. So I think a lot of it is, change up that style.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
What else? What are some, I want to lean the other way, because as I started mentioning before, I got interested in provocative. I was always vaguely interested in coaching, but it wasn't until I came across this style of provocative. Essentially, you can get a lot of progress by taking the piss out of people. Yeah. You can sort of push them a little bit, prod them in a loving way, but a way that sort of shows a mirror to them. But a lot of it I used to do when I would go to conferences with coaches. I would say, let's write a list of good coaching skills. And we'd write out that list on a flip chart. And then I'd go, right, and I'd stick it to the wall and I'd go, now describe for me the opposite of those behaviors, which was like, listening's a good skill. Okay, so not listening. All right. So yeah, like let them tell story. You tell stories to them. Should the stories have a point? No, bad stories that have no point. Awesome.
Just ramble.
And so, and it would be quite interesting, because I think you might find the same thing here. So what are some of the worst or least effective persuasion strategies, do we reckon?
Least effective, I guess, probably be as condescending as possible.
Yes.
People love being belittled, right?
Yeah. I'm having this one at the moment. I'm having a debate with some people on Facebook, which is my favorite thing to do, and definitely a worthwhile thing to spend your time doing.
Right.
And one of their comments started with, you are all less educated than me on this topic. And I was like,
that, you know, I'm so glad you said that, because one of the red flag for me, whether you're in Facebook or this is said on Twitter a lot. I mean, Twitter, we could just have an entire day long conversation about Twitter and what's wrong with that. But educate yourself. That's just the quick way of telling someone how incredibly dumb you think they are. You know, it's just a note. Educate yourself. It's like, okay, yeah.
I like it. Yep, definitely.
Thank you.
But I did want to say, Isaiah, just to kind of piggyback on, you know, everything, the couple of other points that we've already made. One of the things that I try to impress upon, whether it's students, you know, in the classroom, or if I'm going into an organization and doing some coaching, is the number one thing I like people to remember is the message you send may not be the message that's received.
Right.
And it really forces you to really think about, I really do need to think about the impact of what I'm about to say. And it's not, it's not, can I say this? It's really, should I say this? And in what way should I say this? That it's going to be the most effective. I need them to hear this message.
Yeah. You know what, Jen? I don't think there's going to be any way we're going to be able to cover the fullness of what everything I want to ask you.
Oh, yeah.
So we're probably going to have to do a round 2, because this part right here is actually really important, because this is what I've heard. Okay. I've heard actually 70% of what you say isn't even what verbally comes out of your mouth, or isn't the actual words. It's a combination of 1, tone, 2, body language, and and also including a facial expression. So it's like, so the tone, like there's like this line, if you watch Cobra Kai, but something that should be totally like innocuous. He asks this guy, he says, do we have a problem, boss? And so it's like, if you're asking your boss, you're like, hey, is there a problem, boss? That would be like a perfectly legitimate, but he walks up to the guy and he's like, do we have a problem, boss? So it's like, that's just like, let's fight right now. So I think so much people don't really get this about how just, and some of it might even be subconscious, just a facial tick, or maybe just the eyes, the way you might put your eyes, but so much more than what you say is actually implicit in what you're saying. So like for me growing up, my parents would always tell me this, because I would say something with a lot of attitude, and it would be like virtually nothing, but they're like, it's not what you said, Isaiah, it's how you said it. And I couldn't really put 2 and 2 together as like a kid, what they were talking about, just with the attitude or just snarking, you know what I mean? So can you speak on that, please?
Well, I would say regarding the research, right? This is debatable as well. I mean, you'll hear a lot of coaches, a lot of professors, in communication talk about, anywhere from 60 to 90% of your communication, or is nonverbal. And that in itself is debatable, because I mean, there's so many different things you have to consider, in that moment in time, the communication context, who is the speaker, who is the listener, what channel of communication are you using to send that information. So but it's that right there is a rabbit hole we could definitely go down, but let's just
say a lot
go down that rabbit hole. But we do understand, yes, of course, nonverbals are important, and they absolutely do have an impact on the meaning behind the message, and that does go back to the message you send may not necessarily be the message that's received, but it's useful to try to anticipate how that person is going to decode that message. How are they going to take that message? Because, you're right with your example, the inflection that you use on the particular word, of course, that's going to change the entire meaning of that sentence. There's a difference between I didn't say you lost the fight versus I didn't say you lost the fight. Or I didn't say you lost the fight. Right? I didn't change not one word in that sentence, but you got 3 completely different messages, behind that sentence, just based off of the inflection that I used on the particular word. So, we do know that, of course, nonverbals matter, and it is helpful to be mindful of your nonverbals, thinking about who it is that you're speaking to, and and try to anticipate how might they interpret this message. If I say it a certain way, or if I include a specific word, but I would also make an argument. This will be the last thing I say, and because I could talk about this all day, but some of that responsibility also lies on the person who is listening to you. You can absolutely listen in the wrong way. I mean, you could have some defensive listening going on. So you are putting things into it that aren't really there. So I think both the person who's speaking and the person who's listening, they have equal responsibility in the communication context. So you have to think about, am I reading into this, or am I using the right listening for this moment in time? Should I be listening critically, or should I be listening with some empathy? Keep my damn mouth shut, so that the person can just rant and just be there for them. 2 completely different outcomes depending on how you decide to listen to that.
And I wanted to add something else to something you were saying that about the inflection, because I did a chunk of work on that and went on the news actually talking about, the Australian questioning intonation, as it's called, where we go up at the end of a sentence and it makes it sound like we're asking a question. And some of what I think is interesting about it is, as you say, the intonation, the inflection will change the meaning of a sentence. I also think that it will have an interesting effect on ourselves. So there is this whole field of psychology or neuroscience called embodied cognition, which is this idea of if we hold ourselves in a certain way, the physicality, the messages go two ways is the crux of what I'm saying. When we send a message out into the world, it is hitting somebody else's ears and their eyes and everything, and affecting who they are and how they're receiving the message. But also, if we say that in a more confident way with a downward inflection, it's more likely that they hear it and they go, oh, wow, that's an impactful message. And then that goes back to us. We go, wow, it does. It feels different if I use that part of my body to speak. So I think it can be an interesting thing to think about. This isn't just influencing somebody else, but moment by moment when I choose to speak up in a meeting, particularly, I'll jump on people. It's when I particularly use provocative, when people go, this is probably really stupid, and I'm like, what a way to start a message. Like,
then don't say it.
Just don't say it, or just cut it and then say it again later, but go, I've got a really good idea. Say exactly the same thing, but back yourself a little bit, and it will sound different, not just to us in the room, but you'll hear yourself speak like that and go, oh, wow, that feels different.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I would always tease my students whenever, somebody would come up to me and say, I have a really dumb question. And I would respond with, those are my favorite. Oh, goody. What do you have? But that's a really important point, Harry. We call that the sing-songy voice, at the end. And the research shows that a lot of women have this problem. And, so if you kind of take it out of the Australian context,
you said it.
Put a US context to it, It does show that women here tend to use that more sing-songy thing. So at the end, I'm going to sound like I have a question, and it does take the authority out of the voice. So that is one of the things that we do talk about in coaching. You're exactly right, is make a statement. Not a question.
Yeah.
I've always also wondered if it, because the research, shows women have that upward questioning intonation more, and that they are interrupted more. Now, I think there's a lot that goes into men interrupting women, but I wonder if that's some of it, because some of that upward questioning intonation does sound like a question, but it also starts to make it seem like a list. Like, I've got this thing to say, and I'm also going to say this other thing. You can tell I'm not finished yet. You can tell that I'm finished now. And because it feels like a list, less so than a story, I feel like going, bang, I want to talk to you about that thing. So I'm just going to cut you off and go, hey, on point number 2. Whereas if somebody says, let me tell you about what happened last quarter, and it becomes a story, I go, well, I'm going to sit here and wait. And if I've got a question, I'll get to the end of the story and still be able to go back to it.
Yeah.
So I think what I would like to talk about next time that we have a conversation would be about intersex communication, and then interculture.
You mean like talking to people who are intersex? I mean, like, how do I find out? Excuse me, what have you got going on downstairs before we communicate any further? What do you go by him, her, they, them?
Or also intercultural communication, because I live in South Korea, so I run into this issue a lot. But there is one other big question, and hopefully we could spend a little bit more time with this. But okay, so here's a question. I do want to preface this a little bit, because so the question is, how can we be more aware of the lack of nuances while using nonverbal correspondence, such as SNS, or perhaps with text messages? Like just about a month ago, I was actually scheduled to do a kind of like a debate with a guy online, and I literally like logged onto my computer, and I saw this screen coming up that like, we're going live in 5 minutes, and I was like, what the heck? And I went and I read my emails, and I realized that I had misread some of the things that he said, and that's happened to me. I've sent messages, and someone's like, yeah, I'm here waiting for you, and I'm like, where the heck did you get that out of my text message? And so it's happened so many times. Like it's honestly quite scary, or that you can miscommunicate so much whenever you're not listening to someone, you're not hearing their body language. And so that, and then also just because whenever you're communicating online, as you said, you don't have to see the person, so you can say something that you likely wouldn't say had they been right in front of you. So could you just speak to that about
sorry.
No, please.
Some of my thought on that is it's about flow. It's about being like present. So most of the time, because that happens to me all the time, I've got to admit it. And it is particularly because in this modern world where I've got screens all around me and my phone can go off and all of these things that I'll carelessly send a message or carelessly speak to somebody. And because I'm not devoting enough of my RAM, if you will, my processing power of my brain to going, hang on, who is this? What's up? What's the context of this conversation? What was the last thing we said to one another? And I don't mean literally going through that list, but the moment you look at somebody and devote your attention to them, or just as you're sending that text, really go, okay, what am I trying to communicate here? Those are the messages I send well. The thing I notice is of the ones where I go, oh, how do we get that one stuffed up? I'm just in the middle of doing something else and I go, yep, sure, see you at 4. And then I'm like, hang on, my 4 or your 4.
Oh, right.
Or did I, and I think those ones are much easier to come back from, but the ones that bother me are more the emotional ones where I said something and it was meant to be flippant and funny. And it ended up really offending me. And it's because I was like, and then just like, hang on, maybe move that comma. Or suddenly now it's clear that it's a joke.
And, it really, you have to think in terms of the communication context. When you're thinking about using technology to communicate, what exactly is the message that you're trying to send? And then why are you trying to send that message? There's a big difference. Let's say in an organization, you have someone new who's joined the organization and they need to be trained up on something, right? You want them to not only learn the technical stuff, but you want them to become a part of the culture, right? You want to be able to kind of get them to feel comfortable and allow them the ability to ask questions and, interact with others. You can't do that through text messaging. You can't do that through an email. So you have to think about, how important is this message and what is it that I'm trying to gain out of this? So if someone is emotional, texting is not going to take care of that. An email is not going to take care of that. That's going to require, at best, if you're using technology, something like this, it's that way you can have that flow, that back and forth, that conversation, that is needed, for something like that. But if you're just trying to update someone on something, yeah, absolutely. A quick text or a quick email, and, it's in bullet form, so it's very easy.
Right.
A lot, Harry, we have these mental tabs that are all open, right? Yep. So our CPU, you said it the best. Yeah, we don't have enough RAM to compute this because we have all these tabs open. Yeah. So like for you, Isaiah, with that email, if I wanted to make sure that everybody understood exactly what it was, I'm going to give you this update and here's what we have all agreed on, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. Any questions?
There you go.
Yeah, so there's a difference between the need to have a conversation and to allow others to ask questions and to, learn and if there's emotions involved versus here's an update, this is what we've decided and this is what everybody agreed on, here's what you need to know about it. And I think people forget that. We get them confused all the
time. Jennifer, any chance you've ever seen the movie Flipped?
I don't think so.
Or read the book Flipped? So it's kind of like a coming of age, kind of like teeny bopping drama. And we actually just interviewed the author. It got made into a movie by Rob Reiner, actually, kind of a big guy. Okay. And yeah, she just came on. But that was one of the last things that she said about taking time to try to think about how your words could possibly be misconstrued, or intentional or otherwise, And so before you send a message, to try to think, how do you think this person is going to receive this? Because I've had situations where like, okay, I'm going to send this email and I'm going to give them a piece of my mind. And then they're going to get it and be like, oh man, I was wrong this whole time, Isaiah. I'm so sorry. This is the way I'm imagining it go down.
Isn't it weird how that never works?
And then I just never hear from them again, you know? So I'm like, wow, I guess I should have just said, okay, I'm going to take what you said to heart and really listen to what you said and try to validate you as much as I can. But yeah, I just highly recommend that book. The reason why she came on to talk about that book is because the whole story is about trying to see things from other people's perspectives. So for example, there is like a little love story, but it's showing two different stories. Like the boy tells a story and then the girl tells a story. And then you'll just pick up on little nuances that you didn't get the first time around, right? So she did it. She explained the reason why she wrote this story about empathy and about nuances and trying to understand from the other person's perspective is because she said, if I write it in this cute little story from kids, it's going to be non-threatening to people. But she says, what my goal is for people to take the lessons that you've learned and project them not only into the protagonist's life, because it's like it abruptly ends and there's not really any strong conclusion. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but she also says that she also wants the watcher, the listener, or the reader to project those values into our lives. And I think it's just so powerful that it's just such a power. You got to watch the episode where we interview her. But Harry, you got any last thoughts? We're coming to the top of the hour.
At a loss for last thoughts. No, it's been a lovely chat. I think it's been very interesting. It's that challenge. The only thing I was thinking was about trying to be mindful of the message as it lands, but then at the same time get on with it, because I also know there's like on the one hand people that are just thoughtless and send off a message, and then at the other hand I know that I'll sometimes work with people who go, right, I'm on day 4 of crafting this email to the director, and you're like, you think they wouldn't have just preferred a less perfect email 4 days ago? So yeah, something about like just do it as well. Just do it. Like you're better off making the mistake than not having done something. Same thing about speaking up in a meeting or something like that. You're better off speaking up, feeling like you said something a bit silly or you didn't word it as well as you'd like, than staying silent and kicking yourself for the inaction later.
Yeah. I just to piggyback off of that, it's such an excellent point, because that's the other side of the communication challenges that we face that I don't think we were even able to get to this time, maybe in round 2, but you can censor yourself to the point that you lose your authenticity, you lose your ability to connect with someone, because you're not able to be truthful, in that moment, because you're so afraid of saying something wrong or hurting their feelings or being offensive, which is important. Absolutely. I've said it 100 times, if not 1,000 times, be mindful of the message you send, because it may not be the message that's received. But then at the same token, don't limit yourself to the point where you feel like you can't say what you really think about, a certain topic or situation, because then we have the opposite problem. So that's such an important point to remember.
Jennifer, there's so many more questions I have for you, but if we were to talk for like 2 or 3 hours, it'd be a little bit overwhelming. So I think breaking it up into some smaller parts is actually really great. So I know you said you drink coffee, so we like to send you out a Starbucks card. That's what we do for our guests here. And I got one last question for you, though. All right. So Harry is from Australia. He said if he had the option, actually, I can't even remember at this point. Did you want the koala as a pet or the kangaroo?
Kangaroo. I had a kangaroo pet as a kid.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, my dad rescued one. I don't know what happened to its mum, but we had a pet kangaroo.
They're so cute.
That's so funny, because he's Australian, so I was just kind of like trolling him. You know what trolling means? And he's like, no, I actually had a kangaroo, and I'm like,
we called it Qantas.
Okay. Harry is the stereotype of
pretty much.
So
I'm not even embarrassed about it.
Right.
So you have to have a pet. You can't get out of this one. You're going to choose a koala or a kangaroo.
For me, koala.
Koala.
Absolutely. Your cute and cuddly kangaroo is just going to want to box you around all day.
Right.
That's not fun.
Those
Does happen.
those koalas have some sharp claws though.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
get a boy.
Yeah.
Don't get a boy.
That
Boyroos
being
are
said-
dangerous.
Yeah, that being said, we really want to thank you for your time. I really hope that someone listening to this just really takes what you said to heart. We got to do some follow-ups, and I have in the past posted some links in the description box, and I'm going to do that again this time, because I have put like the notes to winning friends and how to win friends and influence people, some other books by some other speakers. I put some PDF files and some stuff that I've paid and I put together. So if you know someone who would like a little help in this area, we're making those resources available because I have put them all together in a drive. And so, yeah. And, you know, if you have any questions in the future, you can send us an email, look us up on our website, www.rhepodcast.com. Let us know what you thought about this video. And if you have any other topics you'd like to see us discuss, or you'd like to come in as a guest, send us an email at rhepodcast@gmail.com. Check us out at Spotify, virtually name it, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And yeah, we want to thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you back again. Goodbye.